Welcome, my friend. Today's video is about the human species that once walked beside us and then disappeared forever. If someone asked you how many kinds of humans have ever lived on this planet, you'd probably answer just us. It's always been Homo sapiens. But that's not true. For most of our history, we shared this earth with other kinds of humans. Some looked remarkably like us. Others were so different that today they would seem like characters from a science fiction movie. One of these human species survived on this planet for so long that our entire civilization, every pyramid, every empire, every war, every city ever built, would fit inside just a single chapter of their story. And today, out of all of them, only we remain. Which raises a question that no one can answer with complete certainty. What happened to all the others? Let's begin with the human species that lasted longer than any other in history. They first appeared nearly 2 million years ago. Take a moment to think about that. 2 million years. Long before our own species even existed, these humans were already walking across the landscape, hunting, making stone tools, and crossing entire continents on foot. They were, most likely, the first humans ever to leave Africa without maps, without knowing what lay beyond the horizon. For decades, scientists believed they were primitive because their stone tools changed very little over hundreds of thousands of years. But eventually, researchers realized something remarkable. It wasn't a lack of imagination. It was exactly the opposite. Their technology already worked so well. There simply wasn't much reason to change it. But in the end, the world wasn't patient with them either. The last surviving groups became isolated on an island. No contact with anyone else. Nowhere to go as the forests around them slowly disappeared. And that's how it happened. No massive catastrophe. No dramatic ending. A people that had survived for nearly 2 million years simply faded away. And if you think that's the most surprising part of this story, wait until you hear about the next one. Let's talk about the most misunderstood human species in history. For decades, we were taught they were brutish, primitive, almost animal-like. That picture couldn't be more wrong. And the more scientists learn about them, the more inaccurate it becomes. They were physically stronger than we are. Broad bodies, thick bones, perfectly adapted to brutal Ice Age climates, and their brains, on average, slightly larger than ours. They hunted enormous animals up close, taking risks few modern humans could imagine. They mastered fire, created sophisticated stone tools, and growing evidence suggests they cared deeply for one another. They buried their dead, sometimes with flowers. They looked after injured and sick individuals, keeping them alive for years despite severe disabilities. These people lived across Europe and Asia for more than 300,000 years. Then, around 45,000 years ago, our own species arrived. For a while, we lived side by side. We shared the same landscapes. And we even had children together. That fact is still written inside our DNA today. But living alongside us brought a silent challenge. Our groups were larger. Our social networks stretched much farther. Theirs were smaller, isolated family groups. When the climate shifted, and it shifted dramatically during the Ice Age, we could reorganize. They couldn't. Slowly, their populations became smaller, more isolated, more vulnerable. And around 40,000 years ago, they disappeared forever. No single event wiped them out. It was a slow erosion, climate, competition, isolation, until there was no one left. Now we arrive at one of the most fascinating discoveries in all of human history. There's an entire human species that we know mostly because of a single finger bone. It was found inside a cave in the mountains of Siberia. A fragment so tiny it fits in the palm of your hand. When scientists analyzed the DNA from that tiny bone, the results matched nothing they'd ever seen before. It wasn't Neanderthal, it wasn't Homo sapiens. It was something entirely new, an entire branch of the human family tree, hidden all along, inside our own genetic code. Since then, scientists have found only a handful of additional remains. A few teeth, part of a jawbone high on the Tibetan plateau. That's almost all we have. And yet, their genetic legacy lives on in millions of people today, among some populations in Oceania. As much as 6% of their DNA comes from these mysterious humans. And the people who live high in the mountains of Tibet, able to breathe comfortably where most of us would struggle from lack of oxygen, inherited that extraordinary adaptation directly from them. A people who barely left any fossils behind are still helping living humans breathe at the top of the world. And finally, we come to perhaps the strangest story of them all. On an island in Indonesia, researchers discovered the remains of a human species that stood just over 3 feet tall. Their brains were roughly the size of a grapefruit. At first, many scientists refused to believe it. They assumed the bones belonged to modern humans suffering from a disease. But as more evidence emerged, it became clear. This wasn't a sick human. It was an entirely different human species. They lived alongside Komodo dragons, giant storks, and dwarf elephants. Because islands do strange things to evolution. Large animals become smaller. Small animals become larger, after remaining isolated for countless generations. Life there followed its own evolutionary rules. The last known traces of these tiny humans date back roughly 50,000 years, almost exactly when our own species arrived in the region. No one knows exactly what happened. Sometimes, on a small island, it doesn't take a massive disaster. Just a little less space, a little less time. And an entire people quietly disappears. So in the end, why did we survive? The obvious answer would be intelligence. But that doesn't explain everything. The people who buried their dead with flowers were intelligent. The mysterious finger-bone people adapted to environments where most humans couldn't survive. And the species that endured for nearly 2 million years surpassed us all in resilience. Perhaps what truly made the difference was something much harder to measure. Our ability to build connections across distance. We didn't just live in groups. We built networks. When one community discovered something new, that knowledge didn't disappear when they did. It spread. When the climate changed, we adapted, because we were never dependent on a single place or a single way of life. But even that isn't the whole story. There was luck, there was geography, there was simply being in the right place, with the right population, at the right moment. Nothing guaranteed that we would become the last human standing. It simply turned out that way. These other humans weren't incomplete versions of us. They weren't failed experiments. They weren't stepping stones on the path to Homo sapiens. Each was a complete way of being human. Each had its own unique strategy for surviving in this world, and today, from that enormous human family that once walked this planet together, only one branch remains, ours. If this story changed the way you think about humanity, leave a like. Tell me in the comments, which of these ancient human species surprised you the most, and subscribe to the channel. Because every week we explore another incredible story that changes the way we see our own species.